After about a decade of real estate investing, I've developed 5 simple but very powerful questions that I ask myself every time I look at a property. These questions have helped me avoid making massive mistakes and making sure I make a good amount of profit on a rental deal. Now, a lot of people think that what makes a good deal is if it's profitable or not. But that's not the only metric you need to be looking at. In fact, if you look only at that, you could actually end up failing later on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. The very first question that I ask myself is there enough housing demand in this particular city to make consistent profit? Typically, what I do when I first start out looking at a city is I will call up some local apartments and some local landlords. So I start off with apartments and I ask them, what is your current occupancy rate? Like how many units are available versus how many units do you guys have total? And what I find is some of these cities, I will call them and they will say, oh yeah, we have a 2-year waiting list to get into our units. That's when I know that, oh yeah, there's a ton of housing demand in this particular market. I like to also connect with landlords through Craigslist or Facebook and give them a call and ask them, how many other applicants have you had for your housing? So if a landlord tells me, oh yeah, we've had like 10 applications and the rooms are closing up really fast or we're getting booked really fast, then I know that, okay, this is a good high in demand city or neighborhood for housing. Then you want to talk to your target tenant. So for me, I target college students. So I will reach out to college students through the Facebook housing groups and I'll ask them, is it generally really difficult to find housing in this area? Do you find it very stressful to find safe and affordable housing? And a lot of times I will get the answer, yeah, it's very difficult. It took me several weeks, a couple months. And that's when I know, okay, there's probably a lack of housing supply in this area, or at least lack of affordable housing supply in this area. So maybe I should really think about investing here. And that's what I did when I started on my out-of-state property. My very first out-of-state property is I looked at several different cities and I basically talked to a lot of students and figured out what cities have a huge amount of housing demand just by calling people up. Now, another way you can assess demand is to figure out what the rental rates are in the area. So for student housing or rent by the room housing, I typically go to Facebook groups because Facebook groups will tell you, Facebook housing groups that is, will tell you how much people are renting out a room for because most of these Facebook housing groups are rent by the room. Craigslist, Rooms and Shares is also another great resource. Checking out Reddit. You can also figure out what room rent rates are. Typically, I'll just type in the college and say rooms for rent, Reddit, or best places to live off campus, or how much do people charge off campus, and then I'll do my research with that. And then if you're renting out a whole house, my go-to resource is rentometer.com. You can just type in any house address and compare it with the houses around the area and see what the average rent rate is for a whole house. Now you want to take these steps because you don't want to be blindsided later on after buying the property and then not getting the rent rates that you wanted to get because you didn't do your research on that. Trust me, I've made that mistake before. I thought I could get like $800 per month per room when it turned out at the time I could only get $650 per month per room. So really do your research beforehand for that. Now, the second question you want to be asking yourself is, once you figured out what city you're going to invest in, to look at a specific deal and ask yourself, does this deal make positive cash flow so that I'm profitable or not? And typically what I want to see is at least $1,500 per month in positive cash flow. So to calculate your cash flow, you take your rental income, you subtract out your monthly mortgage payment, including your property taxes and homeowner's insurance, and then you subtract out your miscellaneous expenses. Typically, I assume miscellaneous expenses to be about $300 per month, and I set aside that money to replace broken appliances, replace a broken toilet, save money for the future when I have to replace an HVAC, etc. So again, that's rental income minus your mortgage payment minus $300 per month in miscellaneous expenses. Now, to calculate the mortgage payment, I typically use a software called Carl's Mortgage Calculator. It's actually an app that you can download on your phone, but there's also a website version available as well. And what you just do for that is plug in the property purchase price, the approximate interest rate. A lot of times you can just Google what is the typical 30-year conventional interest rate at the time, and then you plug in your property taxes and insurance, and it will tell you how much your mortgage payment will be. And to figure out things like your tax rate, you want to go to your property tax assessment website, give them a call and ask them what the typical property tax rate is in that area. And for homeowners insurance, what you can do is get a quote from a home insurance company by just giving them an address and asking them to quote you their policy or their premium on that address. And typically, I would say most homeowners insurance will cost anywhere from $1,200 to $2,400. But in cities that have like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, for example, you might have to purchase additional insurance to cover those natural disasters, and insurance could be a lot more expensive in general. So to do just a quick example of how to actually calculate cash flow, let's say I rent out this house that I can get to 6 bedrooms, and each bedroom makes $600 a month. So $600 per month times 6 bedrooms means the whole house will rent out for $3,600 per month if I'm renting by the bedroom. Then I subtract out my mortgage payment. Let's say it's about $1,500 per month. And then finally, I subtract out $300 per month in miscellaneous expenses. So $3,600 minus $1,500 minus $300 per month is equivalent to $1,800 per month in positive cash flow for that particular deal. So it's a very simple calculation. Just keep things simple for yourself. Now, typically, there's obviously other factors involved, like landscaping costs and vacancy costs, but a lot of that I kind of bundle into that $300 per month in miscellaneous expenses. Now, once you determine if there are positive cash flowing deals in that area or not, the third question you need to ask yourself is this property in a great location so that I get consistent, high quality tenants? Now, what I mean by that is, a lot of times if you buy in a neighborhood with a lot of crime or a rundown neighborhood, it doesn't matter what you calculate out the cash flow to be, you're going to end up with lower quality tenants, or because high quality tenants don't want to stay in those areas. And when you end up with a lower quality tenant, they end up not paying the rent. You might have to deal with evictions. And so all your projections could be great. I mean, they could be done correctly, but then you're buying in the wrong neighborhood. So nobody wants to rent out your place. And the people who do rent out, they end up not paying or you having to evict them. So crime rate is super important. And what I do is I go to crimerate.org and type in the zip code of the city or that particular address, and then I'll bring up a heat map of the area, and I can look for areas that have lower crime rate that people like to stay in. The other thing I like to do is go to reddit.com and ask that Reddit, what are the safest areas to stay in this particular city? And I also like to do the research by talking to students and asking them what are some of the safer areas in this city as well. Finally, the last consideration for location is you want to be near what I call key areas. So there are a couple key areas, and the first is a hospital. The reason why I want to be nearby hospitals is because hospitals employ a lot of healthcare workers, which is an example of a great high quality tenant. I also want to be near colleges because colleges bring in high quality tenants as well if you're at a top college. For example, I rent out to a lot of pharmacy students, dental students, MDs, MBAs, engineers who are really serious with their studies because they're trying to get that doctorate degree, for example. And then finally, I want to be near employers that provide high income jobs, such as tech industries, potentially working for the government. They have a lot of benefits. And so I'm not worried about having unpaid rent because that worker has a high income job. Next, the fourth question you want to ask yourself is this property in good enough shape so it's not going to break down and have major repairs down the road that I have to budget for? Now, the way to figure this out is to ask the realtor how old are some of the key items at the property. So maybe the HVAC, for example. How old are the electricals, the plumbing, the roof, the sewage line? Is the sewage line in good shape? How is the foundation? And I look at those 6 key components because those usually end up costing a ton of money. For example, when I bought my first property, I had an HVAC basically break on me, and I had to pay for a $15,000 mini split AC system, which just came all out of my pocket. And then I also found out there was a broken sewage line after I bought the property, and so I had to pay for a $9,000 sewage line replacement. So all in all, it cost me over $30,000 on that very first house because I didn't really adequately assess what shape or what condition that property was in before I purchased it. I just wanted to basically dive in head first because that was my very first property, and that's why I made a ton of mistakes on that. Now, the key components typically have a very specific lifespan. For example, the HVAC systems, generally speaking, last from 15 to 25 years total. So if you get a house that the HVAC is like 30 years old or later, you know that the HVAC is near the end of its life. So you want to negotiate with the seller to help cover some of the replacement costs or maybe some of the repair costs in the future. Same thing for the roof. Usually roofs that are shingles last anywhere from 15 to 30 years. But it also depends on the weather in that particular area. If you have like a lot of tornadoes or hurricanes, for example, it won't last as long as that. But it also depends on what roofing material you have as well. So there are metal roofs, for example, or concrete tile that will last way longer than 30 years. So kind of figure out what roofing material do you have at the house as well. Although most houses, I will tell you, unless they're newer houses, they will most likely have shingles. What happened to me is I bought a house with an old roof, but because I did all my inspections, I did a roof inspection, I found out that the roof was in poor shape and needed to be replaced. So I was able to successfully negotiate the seller to credit $10,000 towards a roof replacement. So I was in much better shape compared to the very first house I bought and made that mistake. So basically I was able to learn from my mistakes, and this time I negotiated with the seller to put credit towards replacing that roof. Now, finally, the last key component that has a specific lifespan is the water heaters. So a water heater typically costs a couple $1,000 to replace. And water heaters usually last about 10 years. So make sure you figure out when was that water heater installed. And if it's longer than 10 years, you might have to replace it pretty soon. Finally, the fifth and final question is, can I get favorable financing in order to buy this property? A lot of times the property may be in great shape, it's in the perfect area, but you're, for whatever reason, not able to get very good financing. And this can occur and actually sink the cash flow on the deal because you're not getting very good interest rates, or you're paying a whole lot of closing costs and origination fees that you didn't budget for. So it's really important to do your research on the financing aspect. Now, there are a lot of different types of financing out there, obviously, but I recommend always getting at least 3 to 5 quotes so that you can compare the different quotes and you can actually have the lenders compete against each other. So if one lender says, okay, I can do a 7.5% interest rate, and the other one says, I can do 7% interest rate, then you go to that guy who said 7.5% and say, hey, can you beat this 7% interest rate? And then you basically go back and forth until they kind of bid against each other. And eventually you'll end up with one that will save you thousands of dollars. In fact, for me, I actually saved like $10,000 just by shopping around different lenders. And you can do that right away. Now, you also really want to make sure that you are budgeting correctly when you're financing a deal. So you have to make sure you not only have your down payment, but also your closing costs, repair costs, and maybe costs to put in some furniture. So make sure you have enough money. Otherwise, you might buy the property and then run out of money, which is not a great place to be in, obviously. I had that happen for me, and I ended up having to borrow some money from my father and pay him an interest rate on that until it was paid off. And if you have any other questions about how much money to actually budget for this, make sure you check out my video, How Much Money Do You Actually Need to Get Started in Real Estate Investing? So that's it. Those are the 5 questions. Now, the last point I really want to make for you is the first deal that you buy does not have to be a home run. The goal isn't to get a home run. It's just to get on first base and get that very first deal that grows your confidence, doesn't wreck your finances, and gets you started in real estate investing. So what's really important is you don't overthink and overanalyze your first deal. Your goal is to just get in the game so that you can get started in real estate investing. A lot of people who get stuck in analysis paralysis end up never buying a deal. And so for you, I would just say, just get started. Even if that first deal isn't perfect, you want to make sure it's a decent deal and just get in right away. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share it with your friends who are struggling with getting started in real estate investing so it can help them. And I appreciate you watching. I'll see you on next week's video. Thank you.